What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here at TD Garden after the Celtics lose 113-105 to the Brooklyn Nets. We're going to be breaking it all down and talking about, yes, there were a few positive takeaways from this one. All of that coming in just a moment. Well, the Celtics were an above 500 team, but it only lasted a couple of days. And here we are. They're back to 8-8, 500 once again. And there was a lot to hate about this game. I'll start right there. First of all, if you watched Jaylen Brown's press conference, which I do encourage you to check out because I thought that it was a pretty unique one for his kind of vibe this season, he was frustrated with the effort. He was frustrated with the intensity. He was frustrated with guys not kind of bringing their best foot forward tonight. And that's only happened, I think, just once this season. I think the Utah Jazz loss was the only other game so far where it felt like effort and intensity just weren't there. And some teams can afford to come out and be flat for a quarter or two. In fact, probably 8 or 9 teams in this league can. The Celtics, certainly in my last couple years covering them, have been one of those teams. But this Celtics team, their identity is being the harder playing team, being the team that wants it more, being the team that's more ferocious on the glass, and they were not any of those things tonight. And in that case, even if they are playing an inferior opponent like the Brooklyn Nets, who have only won 2 games entering this game, they're going to lose a lot of the time. And I think you saw that come to a head in this one, and you're going to continue to see that, where if they come into a game and they're not the aggressor, they're not the team that is playing the more intense defense, they're going to lose. And that's the difference between the elite teams in the league and the teams that are middle of the pack. And this Celtics team is middle of the pack, but overall, I've been really impressed by their effort and their intensity and their commitment to doing the things that Joe Mazzulla has been preaching and the things that they're all kind of bought into. And that's playing this like scrappy, aggressive defense, that's taking care of the ball, that's crashing the offensive glass as much as they possibly can. Anfernee Simon said it after the game, but they beat them to 50-50 balls. And so while this podcast is going to focus on a couple of positive things that I do think they can draw from this one, overall, I think this was one of those dud losses, probably a bottom 2 loss for them so far this season, because ultimately, as soon as you're talking about effort and 50-50 balls and intensity and like we just didn't bring it, that's a bad loss. And for a team that has already such a thin margin of error, that's a really bad loss because you just can't afford to have those. And when you go back right now, they're 8-8. There's a couple of losses that come down to late game execution. Literally 2 of the losses are, missed box outs. One, Neemias Queta against the Jazz, and then one, Jaylen Brown against the Philadelphia 76ers. So 2 of those losses can be attributed to like 1 or 2 moments of poor execution. And then there's a couple of these games where it's just like, okay, their effort and intensity wasn't there. And I think those are the ones that are, I don't want to say inexcusable because it happens and this is just the life as an NBA player. You're not going to bring it every single night, but this team cannot afford to have many of those games. This has to be a complete aberration. And it has kind of felt that way. So all that being said, tough loss. They're going to have a chance to bounce back here on Sunday, and then it gets tough. It's a difficult stretch here. They played some poor opponents as far as just regular season records and where they're at in the standings, and things are about to get a lot more difficult. So they're 500 right now. If they can be 500 in a couple of weeks, it'll actually be an accomplishment because of the level of talent and competition that they're about to face on a regular basis. The biggest thing that I took away from this one as far as a positive goes is I think you saw the way that Anfernee Simons can impact this team at his best. And I've been a big proponent so far this season that Anfernee Simons has been playing the appropriate amount of minutes. I didn't think that he deserved to be a starter. I didn't think that he was being Joe was being overly hard on him, because objectively, when I've gone back and rewatched these games, the defense just has not been good. And especially on a team that was really going to hang its hat on the defensive end, like it just doesn't make sense to say, okay, we're going to play this guy over Derek, over Payton, who I think has been better than him defensively, but not ridiculously good. But the margin has just been like, okay, he's just not playing well enough to warrant being out there. Tonight I thought was one of his best defensive games of the year, and it wasn't perfect, and he had some bad moments, but that's just life. But he scored the ball, especially when Jaylen went down. Jaylen picks up 5 fouls midway through the third quarter and sits out the rest of that quarter and early in the fourth. And during that stretch, Anfernee Simons was one of their go-to scoring options because Derek White did not have it tonight. He finishes the game with 6 points, and Payton Pritchard scored 11 early on, but finished the game with 13, so he was not really contributing much offensively for most of this game as well. So they really needed Anfernee Simons to kind of create his own shot, and he was able to do that. And I do kind of tip my hat to him that he's been able to just come in, and when they're like, go, his scoring is such like a strong ability that it has, such an innate ability that it's like, go, and he just goes. And so that was impressive to me that he was able to kind of do that. But again, the reason that he played 33 minutes, which was the most minutes that he's played in any game this season, is because he wasn't this like massive liability on the other end the way that he has been at times. I even felt like, everybody's going to think about that Orlando Magic game where he had that I think it was a 23-point first half. He went on an absolute heater. And I went back when I watched that game, it was like he was making so many defensive mistakes that it was like he was basically negating his own heater with what he was doing on that end. And tonight was not the case. Tonight I felt like he was as good defensively as anybody else was. And again, nobody's ever perfect defensively. That's what happens when you play NBA level talent. But that's what they're going to need from him for him to be on the court and to give you the kind of minutes and the kind of offense that he wants to give as well. So shout out to him. Joe Mazzulla said it postgame he played well tonight. That's why he went with him. And it certainly helped that Derek was struggling immensely. I think this was one of Derek's worst games of the season. So it gave Anfernee more opportunities. But he's an expensive part of this team. He's making $28 million. Whether they keep him, whether they trade him, whether they extend him, I don't know what's going to happen to his future. I'd be lying if I said I did. They want to get more out of him than 15 minutes a night because this is a guy that's coming in being the leading scorer for a franchise for the last 2 years. As I mentioned, he's on an expensive contract, and you just want to get either trade value or value on the floor. And so you got to figure out ways to get him going. And I thought tonight, what he did besides for the scoring was what was most impressive. He had a loose ball that led to a Jaylen Brown pass to Jordan Walsh, which was probably the play of the game. He got that steal, right? So that's what you're going to need from him. And again, I don't think he's ever going to be a great defender, but there's a big spectrum of what he can be on the defensive end. And tonight he was on the upper end of that spectrum. Another guy that stood out to me, and I think this is what you can kind of come to expect, is Jordan Walsh, who did far from shut down Michael Porter Jr. In fact, Michael Porter Jr. was probably the reason why the Nets win this game. 7 of 7 from the field in the fourth quarter, 15 points. He was awesome in this one. You're kind of seeing what the vision was for MPJ when he first came into the league before he's been kind of inhibited by his back issues and was kind of more of a spot-up shooter in Denver. But really, just as an aside, really impressive game for Michael Porter Jr. That being said, fourth quarter, Jordan Walsh and Ugo played together for those first 5 minutes, and it was an awesome stretch for the Celtics, and I love those two guys playing together, and I just can't help but think this might be a duo that is here for the future for the Celtics, where you put those two guys out. If their offensive game can evolve a little bit, which I think you're already seeing flashes of that with Jordan, Ugo not quite as much, this is a really potent duo that can play together, and if the Celtics had pulled off this win and had finished the comeback, I would have spent the whole time talking about Jordan Walsh because I thought that his energy, particularly in that fourth quarter, but really in various moments in this game, was what kept this team alive. And it's funny, the other night, 2 nights ago, Jaylen Brown was on a Twitch stream with Jordan Walsh, and we had just talked to him. He was at this bowling alley event, and Jordan was saying, I'm so excited to go on this stream with Jaylen, and Jaylen was showing him Marcus Smart defensive highlights on the stream, and we know that Jaylen's been a big proponent of Jordan playing more. Jordan told us as such in New York. He said that Jaylen went to Joe Mazzulla and said to him, I think he can be part of the solution here, and Jordan didn't know if that conversation ever even happened, but Jaylen's been instilling a lot of confidence and belief in him. And I think you saw moments tonight where Jordan looked like a more empowered defender than he has been. He was diving on the floor. That was actually something that Jaylen said to him on the stream of this is what the crowd loves to see, is diving on the floor, giving it that extra level of intensity. So I think we're just starting to see what this guy can do on the defensive end, and this actually wasn't one of his best defensive performances as far as what he actually limited his opponent to. He's had Tyrese Maxey held him to 1 of 9. He's had some really awesome defensive numbers, but again, I think you have a legit player here, and when it's all said and done, when you go back to look at the season, I think Jordan Walsh's emergence, particularly with how the year started, where 3 weeks ago he was getting DNPs, and now here he is looking like a very legitimate option, one of the best rebounding wings of any wing in the NBA right now. If you look at percentages, he's been a lead on that end. So I think that's a big part of why he's emerged in the starting lineup as well. And he's continuing to start. That's a 4-game streak for him. Josh had a 9-game streak before this. So Jordan's 4 games is not super long yet, but he's clearly developing some sort of rhythm. And I don't think there's any commitment to keeping Jordan in that spot. As Joe has shown us, he's willing to kind of mix it up when he has to. And a quick shout out to our friends over at PrizePicks. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this basketball season on PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. There are some players that have been going absolutely crazy. You look at a Luka Doncic, you look at a Steph Curry, who has just been playing out of his mind, Kevin Durant, Austin Reeves, all these guys, you can pick more on them. PrizePicks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. PrizePicks Play PrizePicks to get action on basketball in more than 40 plus states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. On PrizePicks, how you play is up to you. If you want flexibility, choose Flex Play, where you can get paid even if one of your picks misses. And if you want the biggest payout, go for the power play. No matter your play, PrizePicks is a great way to put your takes to the test. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and I was going to talk about Jalen. Jalen had another solid game, 50% from the field. The big thing for him was the two offensive fouls, and he gets in foul trouble, which sends him to the bench, and that's something that he has to be wary of because they really do need him out there. I don't care what the plus minus says. I don't care what the analytics tell you. They need Jalen Brown to be on the floor. But he, so mediocre game for him in the sense that he was limited. But the thing that I do want to point out, Neemias Queta is getting more evolved offensively, and he finishes this game with 16 points, 7 of 12 from the field. And just in general, I don't think he's going to get a ton of touches in an offense where Jason Tatum's back and they have better weapons out there. But right now, they don't have a ton going on offensively. Derek White has really struggled. He's about 35% from the field for the season. Payton has had good moments and bad moments. But it's felt like a lot of times it's been Jalen Brown just backpacking this offense. He has one of the highest usage rates in the NBA, and he's been efficient and he's been effective, so hasn't really been a problem. But earlier this season, there were so many moments where I was like, hey, Queta's open. Find Queta. He's open. And a lot of people, I know a lot of commenters, a lot of people have been messaging me that, a lot of Queta fans, a lot of people from Portugal have been saying, watch how open Queta is. And it did kind of open my eyes to it. And I think you're seeing a little bit more two-man action with him, but still not as much as I think you can get to. But he's shown an ability to finish around the basket. He had 2 tip-ins in the fourth quarter off offensive rebounds that were really impressive because they were trying to make a comeback and guys were missing easy looks and Queta was cleaning up, and that's a really good sign. So I still don't know what Queta's ceiling is. I don't know if he's a starting center in the NBA on a good team or if he's more of a backup center, but he's showing signs of growth consistently. And this was another night where he had some errors early on. I didn't think this was the best Queta game, but ultimately has a ton of work on the offensive glass, stayed really engaged, and it was a scoring threat for them when they really need one. And so I'm continuing to monitor the dual themes of the season, right? Are they able to win? Are they able to make the playoffs? Can they make a little bit of a run here? Can Tatum come back? Who knows? And then the developmental piece. And on the developmental front, there's going to be ups and downs with all of these guys. And Josh, a couple weeks ago, we were all on Josh, right? I don't want to overreact to one game here, one game there. With Queta, I'm looking at the big picture. Tonight wasn't an insane Queta game. It wasn't a disaster Queta game, but he showed moments and an ability to finish that I'm starting to really believe in. And I think it's only going to get better as he gets bigger opportunities. Everybody knows Queta started playing basketball much later than most, and so some of that is just he is a little bit more raw than your average guy at his age. And I think you're just starting to see him find a little bit of a rhythm, a little bit of a confidence around the basket, and they're going to need, if they can get 15 points per game from him, that really gives this team another layer offensively. And I honestly don't see why they can't when you think about his ability to rebound on the offensive glass. Then also, can Payton, can Derek, can Jalen really look for him and look for the alley-oop? He is a lob threat, right? We see that sometimes, but not a whole lot. So a lot of it is about positioning. A lot of it is about whether his teammates can see him and not see him 2 seconds late, but right on the money. And so there were moments tonight where I was I said, I'm seeing this come around. And again, it wasn't enough. I think there was a lot of things to hate about this game, which I started off with, but it was another kind of positive flash here, which I think that next year he can be a great backup center for this team, if not a starting center, if the game continues to evolve. So we'll keep our eye on that. I don't have a verdict yet on whether I think he can be a starting center on a really good basketball team. I think he's shown in moments that he can be, but this league is all about consistency, right? So we'll see if he's able to kind of put that together in a larger stretch. But I think for now, you look at this game for what it was a night where they just didn't bring it the way that they need to, and you can't have many more of these nights if this team is going to overachieve, which is obviously the goal. But even in a night like tonight, a night that kind of sucked to watch, and there were so many stretches of this game where I was this is just the worst basketball. The Nets look way better than they ever have this season. Even still, I think there were moments of Anfernee Simons putting together maybe his best two-way play of the season. Jordan Walsh just establishing himself as this guy that can really defend at a high level. And then Queta, I honestly did like the offensive involvement, the offensive rebounding down the stretch. It gave them a chance. And so That's it. They lose this game to a Nets team that they really can't afford to lose to. But hey, it's hard to win in the NBA, even against bad teams. It's hard to win 2 games in a row against anybody, especially when you're a team like the Celtics that just don't have all the talent. They have a thin margin of error. Everybody talked about that post game. So we'll see if they can kind of come back and bounce back on Sunday. Check out all the post game press conferences. Joe Mazzulla, Jaylen Brown, Anfernee Simons from this one. We have coverage from practice all week. A lot of interesting stuff. You can check that out. I think Jalen's press conference, he was very candid about the effort not being there. So you can listen to him talk about that in his own words. That's it for now. Thank you as always for watching. Let me know in the comment section what you thought about this game. I'm assuming it wasn't positive. If there were some positives that I missed, let me know, because I couldn't come up with many more.